Warning. Before you watch this video, there will be about 3 spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home. Alright? So either skip to the time spent like 1 minute in or something, or like 40 seconds, or you've seen the movie and you'll watch this, or you just want to get spoiled. So, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield appeared in No Way Home, and Andrew Garfield had saved MJ, redeeming himself. Anyway, that got me thinking, what happened if he saved Gwen? And today, we're going to dive into that. So, the first scenario is where Spider-Man is fighting Green Goblin, and Green Goblin has the upper hand on him. He's trying to kill him, and Gwen's barely holding onto a web, but she manages to get onto a cog, and Goblin would throw a bomb down, breaking it, and Peter would kick Goblin to the ground, knocking him out, and he'd jump, and he'd use 2 webs coming from each end, and the web would catch Gwen and catch the top of the clock tower, giving enough time, and Gwen wouldn't hit the ground, and Spider-Man and Gwen would have a moment of celebration, and Goblin would wake up getting away because they were distracted. Spider-Man would realize when he went up to check to put Harry in prison, but then he realized he was gone. He went to England with Gwen, and they have a life there. And while Gwen was at work, Peter would be fighting crime, and he'd come back to see Gwen had also got bitten by a spider. And she had now got super spider powers, and she'd also become the version of Spider-Gwen in The Amazing Spider-Man. And that would be the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, leading into The Amazing Spider-Man 3, which would be a great cliffhanger, and then I think it would even make a rise to The Amazing Spider-Man 3 if they teased Spider-Gwen at the end of the movie. It would cut to the next movie, and it would cut to Gwen as Spider-Gwen and Spider-Man behind her, and they fight, destroy crime, and now Gwen was known by everyone, and she even revealed her identity along with Spider-Man's, so the two would be known as a duo, but Gwen was well known, so she'd be leading the group. So even though Spider-Man had got the hero first, he wasn't really seen by England at all, and he would be known as the sidekick to Spider-Gwen. Meanwhile, in New York, Goblin would team up with Electro to reveal Spider-Man's identity, and he'd get the rhinoceros machine at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, because there's nothing in the, of course Spider-Man saved Gwen, but if he goes away, 6 months later, that rhinoceros machine is still going to come back, because just because Spider-Man's saved Gwen and they're out, doesn't mean that rhino didn't come. He only came when Peter left, so if Peter still leaves that way, fine. Peter and Gwen would come back after a long day, and they'd see on the news report that the rhinoceros machine had fired, and Aunt May would dodge it, but Goblin had sent his bomb, killing Aunt May, and there would be a cut scene on the TV of Goblin killing the camera guy, telling to the camera that he was coming for Peter Parker, who is Spider-Man. It would cut, and Spider-Man would be like, oh my god. And everyone else would see this, and they know that Spider-Man was the main one in New York, but they still saw Gwen as the main Spider-Girl, and Spider-Man as the sidekick still. Spider-Man would still be getting a lot more attention than just the sidekick role, though. And they'd keep fighting, but eventually Spider-Man would just know he had to go back. Gwen would try and convince him no, and Spider-Man would say he has to. So Gwen would say she's leaving the city for about, she doesn't know how long, but she'll come back, and she has to do this. They will return and fight Electro, the rhinoceros machine, and Goblin. And Gwen would tie up the rhinoceros machine with webs, and Spider-Man would use his web to get a manhole cover and hit the rhinoceros head, kind of like he did in the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and the person in it would die, and Spider-Man, while Gwen was fighting the Green Goblin, Spider-Man would convince Electro to change his ways, and he'd look back, but he'd see that Gwen died. and he'd be shocked that Gwen had just died after being a hero for months. He would beat up Goblin, and Electro would electrocute him. Goblin would throw a bomb, killing Spider-Man, and Electro would kill him. He'd be on the news as a hero along with Spider-Man and Spider-Gwen, and it would go to the England, and they'd realise Spider-Gwen and Spider-Man weren't coming back, and then the crime would just go back to no villains and crime, and it would just, they wouldn't get a big reputation there. And New York was free now, but Electro would be the new hero. It wouldn't be an Electro series or anything, it would just open the door to the ending of the Amazing Spider-Man series. Now we're in the second scenario. So after Spider-Man saving Gwen, we have to go to the second scenario with Spider-Man dying saving Gwen. So how this would go is Spider-Man would be fighting and Gwen would be struggling holding onto the web, and Goblin would cut the web with his blade instead of trying to kill Spider-Man. Spider-Man would kick him and jump quick, catching her, but he'd realise that his webs are out. He'd keep falling down, and he'd take the back pain on his back, killing Spider-Man. And Gwen would look, seeing Peter dead. Goblin would snap out, and he'd realise he just killed his best friend, and Harry would send the glider at himself, stabbing him into the wall as he wanted to die for what he'd done. Gwen would be struggling to move on, and the crime would go up again, creating something else. So what would happen is Gwen would leave and go to England, remembering Spider-Man and having trouble move on. And Aunt May would come with her, and they are completely out of the story now, creating an opening for the brand new remake of this whole series. The Amazing Spider-Man 3 would still be called that, but of course in the trailers it would say Spider-Man will not be included in this because he died at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Electro would rise as a hero, and Venom would come, and they'd have a huge stare-off fighting, and it would go on for months. If you're wondering what's happening in England for Gwen's life after Spider-Man sacrificed himself to save her, she's getting a great business. Aunt May's living with her for her rent, and it's going quite good. Venom would almost kill Electro, and they fight to the death. But then, remember that kid at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2? He'd come and punch Venom in the face, shocking him, and Electro would use that as a perfect opportunity, telling the kid to get out of here. And the kid would run, but he noticed something. Spider-Man's web shooters were on the floor, which were a shock. And he dropped them, and they must have just been here. He picked them up, and he'd use them to save the Electro, and the kid would die, and Electro would grab the web shooters, getting Venom and electrocuting him, but Venom would still get Electro in this. Then Gwen would come back as Spider-Gwen, and she wouldn't have any Spider-Man powers. She would have taken one of Spider-Man's web shooters and see what would have happened in New York, and came back. Electro would electrocute her using all his powers, kill it. Electro would die, and there would go Venom, and Gwen would become the new hero of the city, and that's the end of the series. So I hope you enjoyed the scenario of what if Spider-Man had actually been able to save Gwen in the event of the Amazing Spider-Man 2. Do you agree? Do you not? Do you think this would happen if Spider-Man did do it? Or do you think that if he did do it, it would create awful events in the timeline? And no, it wouldn't work. You didn't want this. Tell me what you think. Bye.